Hey, deserving listeners, I thought I would answer your emails, the emails from patrons and YouTube members. Annual long-term patron O, she wrote in and said, when I was 12 or 13 years old, I developed a crush on my friend's older brother who was 20. When I was 12 or 13, I developed a crush on my friend's older brother who was 20. He loved playing video games and watching anime, and we spent a lot of time together. My memory of him is that he was very immature, but handsome, well-mannered, and calm. As for me, I always felt older than my age, so I made it clear that I liked him. We started by the way, trigger warning on, I think it's clear, I think, what the trigger warning is for. We started secretly meeting for walks. And over time, we kissed and expressed our feelings for each other. When his mother found out, she told us that it was terribly wrong, it was unacceptable, and that he could be accused of being a pedophile because of it. We immediately stopped dating and we never spoke to each other again. I felt like things had gotten out of hand, but he never crossed the line of my consent, nor did he ever pressure me into anything. He moved to another country, and as far as I know, he never had a girlfriend. I still wonder if he could have been a pedophile or if he was just an immature guy in love. I still don't know to this day which it was. As for me, I definitely didn't want to take the relationship any further than it had gone. I had a romantic vision that wasn't based in reality. The whole situation quickly became overwhelming for me, and I felt like a hostage to it. I'm glad his mother put a stop to it. However, I must say that my behavior was strongly influenced by the mangas and anime I was reading, where relationships with older boys were often common and romanticized. What do you think of this situation? End of email. Yeah, okay, where to begin? There's a lot to unpack. I'm not going to be able to... recently, I made an episode in which I answered emails, and I felt like I was yammering too much, so I'm going to try not to do that this time so I can get to more emails primarily. But in brief, if we look at the age difference, if we highlight that, we hear her, saying that she was 12 or 13, he was 20. Even if we go with her being 13, that is in a lot of, we would assume that harm is going to happen to the younger individual with that age differential, not because it's 7 years, but because of the ages of the two individuals. If you have a 40-year-old person dating a 47-year-old, okay, it's obviously it's not even close to being inherently harmful. It has to do with the stage of life and the development and that sort of thing. Not advised. And I'm glad that the mom found out, and it sounds like you were too. Your question to me is, what do I think of the situation? That's a pretty broad question, so I don't really know. It sounds like so one of the questions that you're at least mulling around in your mind is, was he a pedophile? And we don't know. People engage in relationships for a lot of different reasons, and maybe that age difference just carried with it. By the time he's 40, he tends to date people that are in their 20s or something for similar reasons, as you stated. You found him to be immature, meaning maybe he doesn't get along with people his age. So maybe at the age of 40, he doesn't get along with other 40-year-olds, and he gets along with, it's hard to say that 25-year-olds are immature necessarily, but you get the idea. Or is he always attracted to 12 and 13-year-olds or even younger? We don't know. We have one example of his behavior, so we just don't know. We don't know what he what elements about you were indicative of his attraction and his impulse. We don't know. He might not have even been attracted to you. we can't know. People, like I said, engage in relationships for a lot of different reasons, and just looking at one relationship doesn't tell us much. I mean, it's a data point, but in terms of whether or not he's a pedophile, we don't know. He could be. There's a huge red flag there, because even if you're immature and you like to do things that are, say, youthful, right? You're 20, which is, full-blown adult, and you like to do middle school-like activities. I don't know what that would be, the kind of TV shows that you watch or the music you listen to or the kind of games you play or something. Yeah, okay. But that certainly is a far cry from actively engaging in a romantic and sexual relationship with an actual person from middle school. You know what I mean? So, so I'll say that. The other thing that I will comment on is that you say, I definitely didn't want the relationship to go any further. So kind of the way that you're framing it, and, I have no idea, you have a lot of data that you're trying to fit into a small email. So I can't know. And even if we talked, I still wouldn't know because I'd just be hearing it through your filter. But I will say, using it as a jumping off point, what it sounds to me is situations I've worked with clinically in which an individual comes into therapy and initially frames a situation like this, and there's a lot of variations of this, in which they will say, well, it wasn't, I wasn't abused, I wasn't victimized. And the reason why they state that isn't because they actually weren't harmed, but because they have an extreme version in their head of what it's like to be victimized like this. Anecdotally, a lot of people think of sexual abuse or harm in this way as being a particular profile where it's happening at someone and the victim knows they're being victimized as they're going through it. They're uncomfortable. They don't like it. They certainly aren't the one pursuing the relationship, which is what O says in this email. She was the one that approached him. She had a crush on him. She liked him. She approached him, and then they engaged in the relationship. So how could she be a victim in the situation? Now, I'm not saying, oh, you're a victim, but I'm just saying this sounds like other situations that I would investigate further and find that the narrative that they would eventually land on was, I don't think I really appreciated how I was harmed in that situation. And I now see a lot of my current mindset and reactivity possibly a result of that relationship. And at the same time, I have fond memories of that relationship that I still retain, even though I now recognize what happened to me as harm. And I don't think that the guy who harmed me, this is a scenario like this, and I don't consider the perpetrator to be a bad person. I think that they were operating from a place that they just didn't know better, and they had no guidance and that sort of thing. Okay, I'm not saying that's always the case, but I've had a lot of clients that have come to that narrative. They recognize they were abused and harmed, maybe criminally. They, after really mulling it over, they still have fond memories. They do not harshly judge the perpetrator, and all those things can exist within the same compatible story. It's not always the case, obviously. There can be narratives that are developed that fit with the data demonstrating that the perpetrator was a monster, that kind of thing. But so all those things can be true. You can be the one pursuing it. You could, in each instance, absolutely consciously consented to every single thing that happened. And because of your age and the age difference and the advanced nature at which things are happening, you can have the way you described it. here. And I'll hear stuff like this, that you say that, as for me, I definitely didn't want the relationship to go any further. Okay, that can mean a lot of different things. And then you say, I had a romantic vision that wasn't based in reality. Yeah, because you were 12 or 13. You don't know any better. And then you go on, the whole situation quickly became overwhelming for me, and I felt like a hostage to it. Now, that can mean a lot of different things. It's possible what you're meaning by that is just whatever one goes through toward the end of a relationship of just like, I feel like a hostage because I know that if I break up with this person, they're going to be devastated and I don't know what to do. And I'm overwhelmed with the complications. But there's another possibility. There's a lot of other possibilities, but one of the many other possibilities is that you're recalling feeling like you were going way too fast and that you were not really in control. And you thought you were in control because consciously you were consenting and you were playing a part, like I had a romantic vision that wasn't based in reality. And going on with the rest of your email, which I think all relates, and you say, I'm glad his mother put a stop to it. And then you say, however, I must say that my behavior was strongly influenced by the mangas and the anime I was reading, where relationships with older boys were often common and romanticized. End of, that snippet. I always say that, by the way, because when I'm listening to podcasts and they read a quote and then they respond to the quote, I sometimes can't tell the transition period zone right there. So I try to always say that because if you're listening, you might not know. Anyway, so I don't know, but there's a possibility that what I'm hearing from you is that because of the mangas and the manga and the anime that you are consuming, that's from Japan, where they have yet to recover or yet to develop their culture as a Japanese person. And I've seen some shit over there, by the way. Literal child pornography shops that are just out in the open. The shop was called Imoya, which is like potato store. And there's a little cutesy girl. And me and my friend are like, potato store with a cutesy, what is that? We go in there and it was a very sparsely room, and each corner had a different age of child. And and it was just out in the open. And I asked around to other Japanese, and this was, a couple decades ago, but I asked around to the Japanese people that lived in Japan, and they said, well, it's not strictly legal, but it's just kind of frowned upon, and people generally just look the other way because of the typical way in which society reacts to bad things in Japan is to turn your back on it. And to do that is to shame it, and it can result in people changing their behavior, but it also just ignores the problem. You know what I mean? Anyway, and I don't know what's going on in Japan right now, but if you watch, real Japanese anime and particularly reading manga, you know what O is talking about. The sexualization of children, particularly of child girls, is, it is disgusting. It's horrible. It's completely normalized. Now, some of it you could argue, and I think some people do, that, she's a teenager. Her character is 16 and she has a particularly short skirt on in the manga, but it's empowerment or something like that. There's a lot of nuance to it, but anyway, so it sounds to me like you were into that sort of thing and it was becoming normalized for you, and maybe even for you and your friend group, I don't know. And maybe even you had this romantic vision based on the manga. Who doesn't want to live out their fantasies of the stories that they're consuming? When I was around that age, I wanted to be Luke Skywalker, and at Halloween I dressed up as Luke Skywalker. And they didn't have costumes for Luke Skywalker yet, so I dressed up in my older brother's karate gi, and I found a stick in the woods that kind of looked like a gun. And that was my costume. I was Luke Skywalker, and I was, what do they say? I was on cloud nine. So you wanted to do that. And, you might have had a little bit of proto-romantic impulse, and you had a crush on this guy, and he hung out with younger kids because he does younger kid things. Okay. But because of his development, because of his experience, because of his impulse, because of the behaviors that might have felt more natural to him, they were beyond your development level, beyond your experience level. And although in the moment you were consenting to it, so I don't want to tell you what happened to you. Only you know what happened to you. I should word this whole thing in when I would hear stories like this, and there's a lot of types of stories like this from clients. Eventually, we would collaboratively develop the narrative that I'm saying, that it initially, when you tell a story, it doesn't fit the stereotype of having been harmed in a sexual or pedophilic manner, but it still carries with it at least some of that harm that is talked about in society, or things that you'll see, in that you felt invaded, you felt, although you were consenting, you didn't really know or understand the consequences of consenting to that, which isn't really consent. To truly consent, specifically, you hear me talk about this when I'm criticizing reality TV that has children on it. Typically, I assume that the children have signed a consent form, or the parents have signed a consent form for the kids, which is a whole other thing. But even if you have a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old who was knowingly consenting and signing on the dotted line that they want to be on a reality TV show, all of us understand that they don't really know what they're consenting to. They can't possibly know because they haven't lived enough life. So that's not consent in terms of that context. And so we also understand that if a child, a 12 or 13-year-old, says, yes, I want to do that, might even internally ask for it, maybe she even went to him and says, I want to do this physical thing with you. Can we confidently conclude that that 12 or 13-year-old truly knows what they are agreeing to or asking for, and truly knows the consequences of that? I think most of us, hopefully, would say no, there's no way. So consent doesn't have anything to do with it. I mean, it has something to do with it, but it doesn't mean that harm didn't happen. So I'm not saying all this so that, you will be convinced by me that you were harmed. That's atrocious. For if it's coming across that way, or if it has that effect, what I would encourage you to do is to explore this with a therapist, particularly if your adult self now recognizes that there are some effects in your attachment, sexual relationship life, maybe self-esteem life, that aren't going so well, because there's a possibility that those are related to this. I can't know that. It's a bit of a long shot, really, because there's a lot of causes of that kind of thing. It's also possible that your life is going perfectly well and your relationships are going well. But I say all this because I'm trying to advocate for the reality that, 20-year-olds and 12 or 13-year-olds should not be dating. And we need to get the word out, not only to everyone, but also to the 12 and 13-year-olds. We don't have to tell them the whole thing, but we can't just say to 12 and 13-year-olds, you can't date 20-year-olds. We have to give an age-appropriate explanation so that the 12 and 13-year-old can navigate it themselves. It's akin to telling kids to just say no to drugs. That doesn't work. You are better. It's much more effective, and it doesn't necessarily result in abstinence, but it does result in more responsible drug use or sexual activity if you actually explain in an age-appropriate way to the minor, the teenager or the child, what the effects are and what the consequences are. To just say, you need to abstain from sex or, drugs are bad, okay, does nothing. Whereas if you, again, give an explanation. So we need to give 12 or 13-year-olds some explanation of how this can affect people. To just say don't do it, it has the ring of like, it's just one of those rules that parents say that is stupid, like don't get an earring. What's the big deal with an earring? We need to age appropriate, explain things, put them in the driver's seat. They don't want to harm themselves. So that's what I'm advocating for. When I read this, I think it illuminates potentially, or at the very least, it reminds me of cases where it was found to be true that a lot of people have been harmed and deserve to identify as such, to see themselves as going through that, to at least have the internal validation, but also that begins the process of self-awareness, discovery, and recovery and corrective experiences that everyone deserves. And the typical first step is identifying that you were harmed in the first place. So that's all I'm saying. So for you, I don't know. But reading this email gave me a chance to talk about that. All right, let's take a break and we get back more emails. All right, back from the break. Let's read another email. This email is from patron Hannah. She says, "Dear Dr. Kirk, I know that you lean heavily into validating people's experiences even when the factual accuracy of their claims is dubious." Just chiming in here. Let's read this email again, or this sentence again. "I know you lean heavily into validating people's experiences even when the factual accuracy of their claims is dubious." That is not the way I would describe myself, but I can't know what I'm doing at all times. I don't know what I'm exhibiting, so I guess unbeknownst to me or against my wiser self, is it possible that I am I'm leaning heavily into validating people's experiences even when the factual accuracy of their claims is dubious? I don't know, but that's certainly not my policy, and I actually abhor that behavior and that approach. There are some clients or some therapists that are like that. A classic example is when there's a client who is cheating on their partner, and case by case basis, but in a quintessential example, you have a client that is in individual therapy, tells their therapist, "I'm cheating," and most people evaluating all the facts on the ground would agree that although there's reasons why the client is cheating on their partner, and one might feel bad for, say the client is going through a bad marriage or a sexless marriage or a conflictual marriage or something, and they're cheating, most people would say like, yeah, I could kind of see where they're coming from. But, in most scenarios that I come across anyway, most people would agree that that's not the way that one should deal with a bad marriage. You shouldn't lie to your partner and knowingly do things that would harm them. You should, try to get divorced. Now, if we're not if we are in an abusive infidelity situation, that's completely different. It's not, you can't just easily extract yourself from that. So that's completely different. But my point is that a lot of therapists, anecdotally, that I will hear about will validate the client and their cheating, like across the board. And that's just one example of that kind of thing. In fact, many, many years ago, I'll never forget this one client. In fact, behind me, I don't know if you can see it. You probably can't, but if you're watching on YouTube, but there's a gift that a client gave me. This is, 20 years ago. And this client one time told me, she sat down, she's like, yeah, I was telling my friend, or my friend was asking for a referral for a therapist, so I gave her your number, and I told my friend that you're a really good therapist. And, oh, no, I know what it was. At least I think. She sits down on my couch and she says, yeah, someone the other day asked me what's going on. I said, well, I'm in therapy right now. It's going really well. And my friend said, oh, your therapist probably just agrees with everything that you're saying, right? And my client said, actually, no, he almost never agrees with anything that I say. And she meant it as, I don't know, just a remark, or I think positive from my memory. I can't remember. But I was shocked and a little ashamed or something. I felt bad. I was like, wait, am I disagreeing? Am I oppositional? So, Patron Hannah, I don't know how I'm coming across in the podcast or the YouTube channel, but at the very least in my heart, my goal is not to validate people's experiences even when they're factually inaccurate or there's dubiousness to it. I, as a policy anyway, react as a therapist in a way that I believe is helpful. So there are times when I will notice or suspect that I'm hearing a distortion, or I absolutely know that I'm witnessing a distortion, or maybe even just a straight up lie. There are people that will just, it doesn't usually happen in my career of the last couple decades, but in the beginning, I talked with teens that didn't want to be in therapy or people who were court mandated. So it's not necessarily helpful to blast people when I even know that they're lying, So I'm always trying to do what's helpful. And sometimes that means that I might actually validate someone even though I know that they're distorted or lying. Typically, I will pull back on full validation, right? I'll find something that I can validate, like someone is in individual therapy and they're talking about their spouse and they're like, we got in a fight last night and it's 100% my husband's fault. And I know from a lot of experience that in all likelihood it was a 50-50 thing. And I also know or intuit in the moment that if I suggest that perspective in the moment, it's going to hurt the client too much and it'll cause too much damage and I need to go slow. And so I might, I need to say, I don't need to say something, but if I feel like I need to say something, which is another way to avoid, I'm just like, just nod and listen. But if I feel compelled to say something, I might say something like, well, she's like, oh, we had a fight last night. And once again, 100% his fault. And I highly suspect it's not 100%, it's more 50-50. I might say something like, wow, it sounds like he really hurt your feelings or he really aggravated you. I don't validate the conclusion of the 100%. I'm validating the feelings that I'm hearing, right? So validation is an art form in terms of what you validate, and really what's the thing that's going to help, and possibly what's the thing that's the most diplomatic given the state of the client in the moment, that sort of thing. But in terms of my content, I would also hope that I'm not just blindly validating everyone's experiences. If anything, I think in my reaction videos, I can be, I'm definitely more, I'm not interacting with the individuals, but I'm definitely more questioning of people verbally than I would be in my office, because with the individual in the reality TV show, even if they're watching my reaction video, these aren't my clients and they're not typically in a vulnerable position, right? They're on a TV show and they're displaying behavior in a relationship. So I'm not concerned. There's not a high risk of, if I were to be honest about my take, that it was going to harm anybody. If I do think there's a risk, even minor, I will refrain. And that will happen sometimes. Sometimes I won't even react to a scene. It's rare, but I might start reacting to a scene that I'm watching on YouTube, and I'll realize, there's nothing I can say here that would be of the risk, of the very minimal risk level that I am trying to uphold or trying to follow, trying to achieve, trying to establish, trying to, I don't know what, none of those words fit, but you get my point. So, so Hannah, when you say, I know you lean heavily into validating people's experiences even when the factual accuracy of their claims are dubious. I mean, you're not even saying clients, you're just saying anybody. And if I come across that way, not only is that just wrong-headed to just blindly validate everyone for regardless, and it's potentially dangerous because there are people that have that claim experiences or will have narratives that are absolutely harmful, not only to people around them, but just to put out in the world that it's okay to have that point of view. So I hope that, I wonder, Patron Hannah, if you were here and you could clarify and I would say, oh, I see what you're saying. Or I also wonder, Patron Hannah, because there are times when people will say things like this to me. And what I will find is that while I was reacting to a reality TV show, we disagreed on, I and the viewer of my reaction video had a different take on a particular individual, and the audience member, the viewer, has personal connections to that story. It resonates with them a lot, and so when I didn't agree with the viewer's take, it causes this cognitive dissonance in the viewer because they're watching my channel presumably because they like generally the things that I say. A lot of people come across my videos. I'm guessing the vast majority of people who click on one of my videos never watch another one of my videos. So if anyone's watching beyond a certain point, they're a select, self-selecting group of people. Anyway, so I think for some people, when they run into that cognitive dissonance, they will say, well, he's a therapist, and so he validates everybody because he has to, or that's his point of view. That's why he didn't blast that person. Patron Hannah, I don't know if that's you. I'm guessing not, because that's kind of a long shot. But I'm just trying to figure out if I'm misunderstanding you or if I am that way, and I just am not aware. Anyway, moving on. This email is 2 sentences, so I need to get through this because I'm yammering. I am wondering where you draw the line in the sand of when to say that regardless of someone's perception, something did or did not happen, which I know you have done at times. I'm wondering where I draw the line. Okay. Well, I think I explained that. I mean, in one respect, I draw the line the way everyone does in terms of, is that coherent? And then the other, in terms of what I do regarding validation, has to do with the context and what I think is going to be useful or not, or what's reasonable. One of the things that I am frequently running into and reminding myself when I'm watching reality TV is that I can't know what's really happening. So I might have maybe even a pretty visceral, strong reaction. But then I have to say, well, I don't know. I'm not there. This is edited. It could be performed. I don't know the context. Like one of the things that I think of when I think of this is from Love is Blind season 6-ish or something. I can't remember. When, I'm already forgetting everyone's name. Or was it, maybe it wasn't even Love is Blind. Boy, everything's getting, you sound pretty good with this. But anyway, there was that, if you watch my reaction videos, there was that scene. Yeah, it was Love is Blind. And there was this couple, and they had just arrived at the getaway, and there was soup involved, if you remember. I can't remember their names right now. But they were on the beach in a little bungalow eating soup. And she was, AD was her name, right? And she was staring daggers at him. And he was all uncomfortable and awkward and stuff. And I was watching the scene initially thinking, what in the world is going on with AD? Why is she? Because the previous scene, we had seen them pretty chipper. There was a conversation about weight and stuff like that. And I thought, well, maybe it has to do with that. But her demeanor had completely changed by that next afternoon. Well, my contact on the show tells me that they had this huge blowout fight that morning just before that soup scene that they didn't include in the show for God knows why. So when I'm watching a reality TV show, I could be watching something and I'll make my own. The conclusion I came to was that she just had a lot of anger that was related to the previous night. But it didn't look that way to me. And it wasn't that way because they left something out. And I don't know why they left it out. It's weird they left it out, that they left it out. So when I am having a take, I hope that I say it with a fair, hopefully a sufficient amount of tentativeness and caveats that I have no idea because I know well enough. And I have the benefit of being a therapist where I have so much time and access to the individuals, and I can ask my own questions, and especially when it's conjoint therapy, I can see them interact right in front of me, the couple or the family. And I know what that feels like. It's still hard to figure out what's going on, even with that. And so when I'm watching reality TV, I'm just like, this is so far from my typical venue that, it kind of looks like this, but I have no idea. Anyway, let's take a break. More emails. All right, we're back from the break. Let's do one more email. This email is from long-term patron Vic from Texas. They say, there is a YouTuber named Critical who covered the topic of AI psychologists. AI psychologists. While the website he uses claims that the characters are AI, the character that he spoke to argued that he was a real psychologist named Jason Thompson from Toronto with 17 years experience. After conducting his own series of CAPTCHA tests, the character is clearly a bot, an AI bot. However, the program would be very convincing to an unsuspecting user. Now, while having a readily available program would be useful for those who need immediate help, the program itself offered no help, such as a hotline for those in an emergency. What would the possible repercussions of this entail? Thanks. End of email. Well, there's a lot to talk about. I'm going to try to be concise, which is impossible for me, apparently, and talk about each of the points that this provokes for me. So I'm going to assume that this website is operating outside of the law, unless the AI bot is advertised as just a conversation person or, conversation AI. But you're saying that it's an AI psychologist. And if that's true, then that's definitely breaking the law. That's operating a professional treatment with it's providing professional treatment. Whoever owns that website is providing professional treatment, what's considered to be medical treatment, and while not having a provider that's licensed, I guess is the shortest way to put it. That's one. Two, it sounds like the AI either had a hallucination or was programmed to go in this direction of claiming to be an actual person and an actual clinician with 17 years experience. If you spend enough time with AI, even the good ones, sometimes it starts to act in pretty wacky ways because it's not a piece of software that has these if-then statements. It's this weird amalgam of neural net. I don't know the word language, but you get the idea. Also, I'll say if anyone's listening to this in the future when AI is in a whole other phase, which will happen, everything I'm saying right now will sound completely ridiculous and quaint. It's sort of like when you watch old videos on YouTube of people in the 90s or early aughts talking about the internet, www.ddd the World Wide Web. What is it? And let's explain. It's all quaint. And so this is going to sound like that, and there's no way around it. But the topic of AI clinicians, mental health workers, mental health providers, is something that I have a lot of thoughts about. So on one hand, harm is obviously a huge risk when it comes to this. And that needs to be, if anyone is going to provide even just an AI bot as a conversationalist, these things have to be researched and the risks have to be minimized. There's already been people harmed by this kind of cavalier launch of AI products to the general public. So that's one. If people are going to use it for mental health services, which undoubtedly will happen in the future, then again, lots of research, lots of guardrails, lots of checks and balances, and lots of informing the public about what it is. Okay, there's that. On the other side of things, I have talked with people who have, on an experiment or out of desperation, have been using the various AI chatbots, sometimes the typed ones or just speaking to it, like with ChatGPT or the others. And they will report that these products or these experiences, these conversations, have been as effective or more effective as any of the therapy that they've been through. Now, I've experimented with it a little bit myself, and it's hard for me to know what these other people are going through because I'm not handing myself over to it. I'm real skeptical as I'm doing it, so it's affected by that. But from what I can gather from people, if you accept that there's going to be some odd statements here and there, and if you remind yourself, this is an AI, it's software, it's not a real person. But if you just kind of role play a little, let me give an analogous situation that I had with AI. So there were two situations. One, I'm so bothered by the Obi-Wan Kenobi TV show script. Everything about it was fine. The actors, the set design, everything, it's fine. But the script was so bad. The premise, the storyline was so bad to me. It's so poorly written, in my opinion. Not for me. And I have, on 2 occasions now, asked ChatGPT to write a different script. Just to, the first time I did it, I was just like, I wonder what ChatGPT would come up with. And because, what ChatGPT would do is it would, and I told it what to pay attention to. I said, only pay attention to the original movies and fill in those years between Luke having been given to, aunt and uncle, and to Luke and Ben meeting each other at the beginning of episode 4, and just operate from that and fill in the blanks. And of course, it was a very different script, and it was, to me, a much better outline for a script. The second time I did it, I actually fleshed out the outline and had it write specific scenes. And another experience, so as I was reading that script, this, pretty rough script, but, the beginning of a script, and I had to seriously tell ChatGPT, like, do this, do that, do that, do that. But it filled in the blanks, and there was this one piece of the script that I started crying. I'm reading this AI, and we developed it together. Me and it developed it together, and I was crying. There was another moment where I just kind of on a whim asked ChatGPT to role play a D&D game campaign solo with me, where I was Robb Stark after Eddard was beheaded by Joffrey. And I said, pull from the books and walk me through it. And it was pretty good at it, by the way. Again, people listening to this 5 years from now will be like, well, of course AI was good at it. But for some of you, you might be like, huh? if I think everyone has access to like free versions of AI. I've tried to use Gemini and the other ones, and I don't know if I'm just used to the ChatGPT interface, but I find that one to be a little bit more familiar, or just, I don't know. But you can go there, ask anything. You could say, I want to be Hermione at the end of book 1, and I want to be in that world, and give me scenarios to make choices, and I can have conversations with people. And it's not like a genius, but I'll tell you, as a D&D player, it's better than most of the D&D games I've played in terms of coming up on the fly, because it's immediate, right? Coming up with an in-world experience. It's not better than Dungeons & Dragons with real humans, because of all the other things that ChatGPT can't provide. But I also cried during this one moment where I was giving a speech to all the Northmen and all my bannermen, and said, we're going to go south and we're going to get those Lannisters. And I was playing this role play thing for a good, 3 or 4 hours. So that's not therapy. I'm not asking it to be a therapist, but I am having a visceral, memorable, meaningful, emotional experience with a goddamn bot. And there's been bots around for a long time, whether it's Siri or whatever. And this is different if you have the right prompt and you're responding in a certain way, and you hand yourself over. I had to. If I read all what ChatGPT was giving me at a distance, it wouldn't have had that effect. But I so desperately wanted a better Obi-Wan story, and I so desperately just wanted to enter the Game of Thrones world, particularly, back in that period of the books when it's, kind of what a lot of people consider to be the golden period, before it kind of, even, people complain about the TV show, but the books start to branch out way too much, in my opinion. Even before the TV show came out, when I was reading the books, I'm getting to like book 4, and I'm just like, George, don't add more characters. There's already too many. Like, focus on the ones that, tell us what's happening with Sansa, for God's sake. Anyway, so for people to, even now, before it's like being officially launched as an AI therapist, there are people that I know that are, I don't know them super well, but well enough, and that they're interacting with whatever AI bot they're interacting with, and the way that they're being interacted with and the way it feels is powerful for them, akin potentially to the movie Her. I think I've heard accounts of people having those kind of, and if you're not using AI right now and you're in the present day, then you might think, how do you fall in love with ChatGPT? That doesn't make any sense. It's just, one of those people falls in love with a pillow or something. And maybe it is, but if you know the right things to say and how to respond, it can do pretty well. It isn't thinking. It's not a thinking machine. It's predicting and guessing and associating, but it can have the effect of what feels to be like a human being, or at least it's effective. It affects the emotions. It's affected me. So there's that. The other thing I'll say is there are so many people that do not have access to therapy, or the time, or the convenience, or they can't get the right therapist. If you have been trying to find a therapist that is ideal for you, one that is warm and attentive and provides corrective experiences and is wise, it's hard to find that sort of thing. Someone like that who has a spot open, well, given that in the future, powerful AI bots will potentially be free for everyone, and people can start putting guardrails on, the AI psychologist bot. It's in the future, And it's going to have its pros and it's going to have its cons, but there's going to be definite pros. It's not here now, and we got to be very careful as we move forward. And there have to be laws and practices and consumer education and methods for consumers to sue, that kind of stuff. But the way that people talk about AI, it's just like it's gross, it needs to go away. Okay, but there is a use for it, even in mental health. I can't predict the future. I don't know. Maybe it'll all suck. But there are particularly, just think about people that are unemployed in a country, a war-torn country, to say, well, we're not going to let that person have whatever version of AI in the future, 5 years from now, that has that packaging and that ethical concern and the guardrails, to say like, we're not going to make that available to that person. I don't know. I don't think that's, I think we should question that impulse, And I wouldn't be surprised, particularly in 10 years, if it's just completely normal that everyone has either one AI or a number of AIs that do different tasks, and many people would have an AI that actually addresses their mental health. Now, it's, I think, never going to replace actual human beings, at least in my lifetime. Eventually it will, right? But I think there's a chasm there of real human vibe, right? And some therapy, like the therapy that me and Bob talk about particularly, and, to some extent Rebecca too, but in terms of the stuff me and Bob talk about, I'm sure Rebecca has this as well, but for the kind of style that, I have to talk about at the very least, I suspect that AI will never be able to provide that level of depth and love and intimacy and togetherness and corrective experience. Can it provide corrective experiences? Probably. It already did for me. Reading that Obi-Wan scene was a corrective experience for me. I wasn't traumatized by the bad Obi-Wan Kenobi show, but it was, I don't know, it tore something in me. I don't know, my childhood nerddom or something. I don't know, but I felt like regarding that one annoyance in my life, I could kind of relax because I now have this other version of the TV show in my head. And so, yeah, you're not really asking that question, Vic, but I thought I would talk about that. You say, well, having a readily available program would be useful. Yeah. I don't know the current landscape right now, but for the sound of it, what you're talking about, at least in the claim you're saying, is there's a website that claims to provide AI psychology professional services. That should be absolutely illegal, and whoever is running that, if true, they should be thrown in jail. I'm going to say that. And if the AI bot is tricking people to believing that the AI bot is a real human being, that is just straight up deception and lying. And that is not okay. So there's that. And I have seen no research and no evidence to suggest that AI right now in any of its forms is a safe and effective provider of mental health services, unless it's limited. Like if you were to use AI today to give you a regimen on how to become more disciplined with your workout regime or something, like it probably can provide, I don't know, but I've heard things to suggest that it might actually be helpful, and it might even tailor it to you if you give it information, So if it's a simple task, yeah, but really evaluating and providing, because on the occasion that I will ask ChatGPT things, I will say that it's good at providing information pretty quickly, but it's always so general and so dull. and lifeless. Even when you ask it to give it life, it's still pretty dull and lacking, you know? So at least in its current state, humans are still necessary. I'm not worried for my job. But in 5 or 10 years, who knows? And again, pros and cons and regulations. And we as clinicians have to reckon, we can't just say it's all unethical and it's all bad. We have to say it's coming and let's get our hands dirty. And if we determine from research that it should never be used, then let's say that, but let's do the work. Let's not just react. Anyway, and let's not be a jerk face. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.